Welcome. It's hard to imagine how people who have supposedly dedicated their lives to the education of children could hatch such a scheme that would be more detrimental to their welfare than what was happening in the corridors at the highest levels of the El Paso Independent School District. And here to give us some insight into this is one of the tragic casualties of the scheme, former principal of El Paso High, Dr. John Roskoski. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much, Holly.
Yeah, it's brave of you to be here. I really appreciate it. And you were really the first one to speak out publicly about this whole scheme. Why is that?
Actually, what happened when I retired from the district, I was gone. But the article that was put in the paper where Mr. Russell Wiggs commented and called an employee a disgruntled ex-employee, and then admitted that he hadn't done any investigations at all, but he still referred to her as disgruntled. That was the straw basically that broke my back, and I just had to do something about it. So I was just writing a letter, and Bob Moore called me and asked if I would be the guest columnist, and of course then it blossomed from there.
Yeah, right. And so really it was a sense of outrage about the hypocrisy of a board member. Is that right?
Yeah, that's basically what it was, because I've been watching it on the board. Even the previous boards were the same way. They constantly, the mantra is, I don't recall attending that meeting, I don't recall being a part of that discussion, and whenever an employee comes forward, they're always classified as a disgruntled employee, and that's just not right.
Yeah. And so you actually resigned from your position as principal of El Paso High, and what was it that drove you to do this? Because that was not something you really wanted to do at that time, is that right?
Absolutely not. I had reached the area where I really wanted to be, which is the principal of a high school. And El Paso High is a dream come true, because it is an absolutely beautiful school. Your son was one of my students there. Wonderful school. I had great staff. I had great students. I had planned on staying there for quite some time. And then our superintendent changed, and we got Dr. Garcia. Things changed in the district. It became more and more difficult to work for students. And then when directors were assigned to the different campuses, the director that was assigned to my campus made my life absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
Constantly asking me to do things that I felt personally were unethical, and I also felt did not help students. I lasted for 2 years, and I just couldn't take it anymore.
So what were some of the kinds of things that they were asking you to do specifically, so that we can understand that? So the goal was to improve the numbers, so to speak, in the district.
Yes, basically that was it.
But not necessarily the quality of the education.
I did not see a concern about the quality of education. The concern was improving EPISD to become a recognized district, which would benefit, of course, the superintendent and the district as well, I will admit that. But they did not want us to do anything to actually help students. The idea was, for instance, El Paso High School, Bowie High School, Jefferson High School, we have a very large limited English proficient LEP population there. The idea was these students, the district wanted us to identify the students that would not pass the TOKS test and make sure that those students did not test. And there were several ways that they wanted this to happen. You could have the student removed from the campus. You could send the student away to another school. As you've already read in the papers, there were schemes that were put in place to actually take students that had more than enough credits to be classified as sophomores and retain them as freshmen so that they didn't take that 10th grade test, or give them enough credits so that they jumped right over the 10th grade and went to the 11th grade, so they did not take the 10th grade test. The 10th grade test is what the federal government uses to rate district schools. The state uses the 11th grade test. That's the test, the exit level test, that students had to take TOKS. so that they could graduate. So we were having a lot of students just bypass the 10th grade completely and were unable to take be successful on the 11th grade test. Consequently, they weren't graduating from high school anyways. The idea was we're not interested in educating these kids, we're interested in making the district look good.
And so this was immoral, for one thing.
Yes.
It was
Oh, yeah.
illegal and unethical.
Exactly, and there were many of us. I'm not the only one, and some of the other principals that came forward were not the only principals that believe that this is absolutely wrong. We were not helping kids. The intent was to help kids, and because we did not do what they wanted us to do, the directors, and I have already been informed that the director that I had admitted that she had a directive from Dr. Garcia to get rid of these specific principals.
Now, specifically, what kind of things did she and the district do to try to get rid of troublesome principals like you?
Thank you for classifying
Yeah, right.
me. I guess I'm a disgruntled employee
Yeah,
now.
right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I've got to clarify that. I am not a disgruntled employee. I absolutely loved what I did. But, for instance, when it came to the LEP population at El Paso High School, I was required to identify every single one of my LEP students that was eligible to take the 10th grade test. And then we had these students on a board in one of the conference rooms, and we looked at their past test results, we looked at what they were doing in classes, and if the director felt that this student was not going to be successful on the TOKS test, then the director told me to make sure that that student did not take the test.
And what was usually your response to something like that? How do you deal with that if somebody higher up gives you the directive? And I know this is not easy.
No, it really wasn't easy. And once again, it comes down to the integrity of the individual. It would have been very easy for me to say, oh, sure, let's go ahead and do this, and let's not worry about kids whatsoever, and I can really make this school look great, and I can make these kids disappear. Apparently, that's a new term now coined by EPISD, is to make students disappear. I could have actually done that, but my mandate is to educate all students. And with my Christian background, I felt that, I can't do this. So when the directives would come down, my response, and I also directed one of my assistant principals, my curriculum assistant principal, who was a phenomenal curriculum person, I directed him to, you follow my lead. And even though I would give lip service to the director that was down, our goal was to educate every single LEP student. So I did not make any LEP students go away. As a matter of fact, if you looked at El Paso's LEP population up until the year that I left, we were in the 80s every single year. You have to have less than 50, and that makes a subgroup. 50 makes a subgroup. If you have less, they don't count. And then the year after I left, all of a sudden we went from El Paso High went from 87 LEP students all the way down to 39 LEP students. What happened to those students?
Yeah, right. So basically, you had to pay lip service or else experience consequences, but at the same time, you did not implement what they were talking about.
Exactly, and I will gladly give you for instance. There was an instance where I was at a conference, and when I returned, the director that was at my campus that Monday morning really read me the riot act because my assistant principal did not follow her directives, which were given, by the way, at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon after all the teachers had left. When I talked to my assistant principal, he explained to me what she had actually required, which was actual identification and isolation of LEP students taking the retest on the TOKS. When she was following me up the stairs, checking the rooms, and she was just constantly harping about this assistant principal, I just mentioned to her, I heard you the first time. And she left the campus. Right after that, my secretary called me. I had to report to Dr. Garcia's office, where I was severely chastised in front of her and in front of Dr. Murphy, the associate superintendent for priority schools. And I was told that even though I held the rights and responsibilities of the principalship, I would do what the director told me to do.
And how many other principals were getting this kind of pressure? So there were, what, 3 or 4?
There were 5 of us,
Five,
actually.
5?
Yeah,
Which high schools was that?
Mr. Rubio from Bowie High School, who also retired, Mr. Villarreal from Jefferson High School, who also retired, Dr. Lane from Jefferson High School, Mr. Villarreal's replacement, who also retired, Mr. Plecluta from Austin High School, who also retired. Actually, Mr. Plecluta, unfortunately, was demoted to the position of assistant principal and sent to Coronado High School for 1 year, and then he retired at the end of that year. And then myself. There were 5 of us, actually.
So these are 5 experienced, dedicated principals who were basically driven out by Dr. Garcia.
Actually, yes, and I had the least number of years in EPISD than all the rest of them.
Yeah. Now, what would motivate Dr. Garcia to invent a scheme like this that is clearly illegal and unethical and immoral?
You're asking me to look into the mind of someone like Dr. Garcia.
Yeah, right.
I can only give you analogies. Before Dr. Garcia was the superintendent, he came to visit schools, and El Paso High School was chosen as one of those schools. When Dr. Garcia arrived, along with people from the district, I was asked to give a little history of El Paso High School and explain what was going on and what programs we were running at the time. Dr. Garcia would not give me eye contact. He would not acknowledge me whatsoever. In the middle of what I was saying to him, he turned around to the district representative and said, "I'm ready to go," and just walked off my campus. He was extremely arrogant, and I felt that this man will never be the superintendent. I was wrong on that. He became the superintendent.
So this was when he was interviewing?
Oh, yes. I mean, we had
amazing.
a good picture of him before he was even selected as the superintendent.
So you're talking about, in your opinion, a fundamental character of self-centered arrogance.
Yes, exactly. That's what it was, Holly. This man has only been focused on himself and what makes him look good. I do know that while he was superintendent of EPISD, he was also interviewing for superintendencies at much larger districts, Austin and San Antonio being 2 of those. And he was trying to show how successful he was in EPISD, when in actuality there was no success. Students were just not being educated, and this scheme, I don't know how long, but this scheme had been hatched.
And so this was not going on prior to his tenure?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I had 3 prior superintendents while I was in EPISD, Dr. Paz and Dr. Anzaldúa and Mr. Charles Tafoya. And even though each one had some issues, they were all very dedicated to student success, not like Dr. Garcia.
Now, El Paso High is actually, while you were the principal there, was rated one of the top 1,000 schools in the United States, right?
Yes, we were. I was very surprised. I did not realize what was happening. I got the phone call from Newsweek to congratulate me that we had made one of the top 1,000 schools in the United States.
Yeah. And what was the basis of their analysis?
What they look at primarily is the socioeconomic status of your campuses, and based on that, how many students do you have that are involved in advanced placement courses, and how many of those students are successful in the advanced placement courses. And we were running a program at El Paso High where anybody who wanted to get into advanced placement, we allowed that within certain parameters. So we were getting a large number of students, our lower socioeconomic students, that were being outrageously successful in advanced placement. And so all of a sudden, we're one of the top 1,000 schools.
And is that a true measure of success?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, Holly,
Yeah.
gee whiz, we're taking kids that just take regular courses, and all of a sudden we're getting them really engaged in their own education, and these kids are taking advanced placement courses. What better indication is there that we're being successful with students?
So ironically, from the district's perspective, they're evaluating you as a low-performing school, but from an international source like Newsweek, who produces a lot of material on colleges and good colleges to go to and so forth, evaluates you as one of the top 1,000 high schools in the United States.
Yes.
It's very ironic.
And on top of that, the year that I actually retired, because of everything that was going on, before I even made my notification of retirement, after the March running of the TOKS test, and the results came into the district, I was called by Dr. Murphy, the Associate Superintendent for Priority Schools, to congratulate me that El Paso High School has made recognized status. And at the next principals meeting, I, along with all the other principals from high schools that were recognized or exemplary, were honored. We were asked to come up on the stage, and Dr. Garcia shook our hand. So even though I did not make my LEP population disappear, we were doing something right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what kind of things were you doing? Because this is a legitimately difficult problem when you have a lot of limited English-speaking students, and you have to educate them and get them ready in a very short period of time to graduate, 4 years. You know, how and you're competing with other schools in the United States who don't have that problem.
Yeah.
What are some of the key things that you did to be successful?
Had a dedicated faculty, a really dedicated faculty. I had teachers that were coming in early, 6 o'clock in the morning. I had teachers staying till 7 o'clock at night, working with individual students. We were running what we called the Learning Center. I hired tutors from UTEP to man that. We trained them on testing strategies, mostly science and math, and students were allowed to go there anytime during the day, providing they had already finished the work in their classroom, and get extra help. So we were running a massive 5-day-a-week tutoring program. We had tutors in the classrooms, also students from UTEP assisting teachers in the classroom, so we were giving a tremendous amount of support. We were doing homework makeup. Students,
I remember Lunch and Learn.
Lunch and Learn.
My son went to that a few times.
Yes, and you know, Lunch and Learn was brought to me by my special education department because some of the special ed students were not completing homework, and the teachers, the main faculty, were also, one of the concerns was not completing homework. So the question was, how important is homework? Is it busy work or is it real work? And when we got down to the nuts and bolts of how important homework really was, real homework, then we took Lunch and Learn across the entire campus, which, of course, you know through your son Will, that if a student didn't complete the homework, the teacher didn't make a big deal about it in the classroom, but the very next day that student was selected by one of our campus patrols, and he was taken to a classroom where that subject area teacher was waiting, and he had to stay there for the entire lunch period, so he didn't have lunch with his friends. We supplied lunch for them, so we didn't negate
They didn't
lunch.
starve, yeah.
They didn't starve, you know, but they had to do homework. And a tremendous number of the students learned on one experience, oh my gosh, they're going to take lunch away from me if I don't do my homework. So all of a sudden, the quality of homework increased dramatically. I mean, we were doing everything we possibly could to support students. I had two of the finest LEP teachers I have ever seen. Limited English proficient, and they really worked with their students. We worked very diligently on getting our Spanish-speaking students to speak English everywhere, including the hallways.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's a big one. It bothers me when I go on to campuses here in El Paso and the staff is speaking Spanish to the students. I think it's
that's a big issue here.
A huge thing, because I've tried to learn Spanish, and I know that unless I am in an environment where I'm forced to speak it, I do not learn it.
And that's exactly right. And everything we do in the United States, education-wise, testing, everything, is in English. So if these kids do not have a good grasp of the English language, they are not going to be successful.
Yeah. Right, absolutely. Okay, so I know you're very enthusiastic and passionate about what you did, and that I remember that when I was one of your parents. So the question I have is okay, so I could see one man, Dr. Garcia, hatching a scheme like this, but how do you get an entire bureaucracy or a large percentage of the bureaucracy to either participate or shut up about it?
That's a very difficult question to answer for me, but in my opinion, the people that were involved and are still involved, we already know that they're talking about 6 unnamed co-conspirators, but the people that were involved in all of this felt this was the way to make a district look good. they lost their vision, the vision of we're here to educate children. And once again, it did not bother them to go ahead and circumvent laws and everything else. Dr. Garcia did not do this on his own. Some of the people that he brought in from outside, because he brought in a lot of people from outside, they were all willing participants. If people stood up in the beginning, when he told his associate superintendents and his directors, this is what I want you to do, I think if people had stood up at that time and said, this is wrong, or went to the school board, I'm very naive. I believe that that would have changed the course of EPISD. Unfortunately, after talking to my friend Dr. Lane, he went to the school board and was rebuffed. He went to TEA and was rebuffed.
What's TEA?
Texas Education Agency. I'm sorry. He
Yep.
went to he called Texas Education Agency and was rebuffed. He called the United States Department of Education and was told, have a nice day.
So there actually was an individual, possibly more individuals, who did go through the supposed chain of command
Exactly.
to make a complaint, and they were rebuffed. And he was
Exactly.
rebuffed.
And
Yeah.
you have to also understand that when Dr. Garcia came in, several members of that school board at that time have already been found guilty of corruption and are no longer on the school board. So there was widespread corruption going on in the school board.
So it was really kind of a bad soup all the way around, and that there was, I know that there were bribes being taken for various government contracts and,
Yep,
and
there
all of that. I
certainly-
mean,
yes, there was, yeah.
It's inconceivable
Yeah,
that this could be happening.
How this was going, and some of the people that got caught up in it, I truly believe, for instance, one of them, Coach Cordova, I truly believe is a good man, but he somehow got caught up in everything that was going on, or went along with some of the other board members. I really don't know. But the board that we have in now, the president of that board, she can't even keep her story straight in the paper. In one story, she contradicts herself several times.
Now we're running short on time, but what's, from a Christian perspective, from an ethical Christian perspective, obviously Dr. Garcia and his whole moral character is severely compromised. But what about people who run that continuum from, like, Coach that you were talking about, to your fellow colleagues and you? You said that in your article, the article that I read in the paper, that you were a little bit ashamed that you hadn't spoken out more, or that maybe you would have done things differently.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about that a little bit?
I'll just very briefly, because I know time is an issue here. But yes, most definitely. When I knew what I was being asked to do, to speak out, but to speak out to whom? I could not speak to my associate superintendent and tell him what I'm being asked to do is wrong, because he was directing me to do it. I could not speak to the superintendent and say this is wrong, because the superintendent was directing everything that was going on. I could have possibly gone to the newspaper or to someone like you and spoke out, but you know, as I mentioned in my letter to the newspaper to Mr. Wiggs, when you're an employee and you need your job, I have a family to support, I have a home, I have bills just like everyone else. I needed my employment.
And your wife also was going through...
My wife was diagnosed with ovarian cancer.
It was
and
a very traumatic
we were
time.
going through a very rough time right after that. So when you have people in this situation and they need their employment, it's very difficult to bite the hand that feeds you.
Yeah, right. So in retrospect, given all of these avenues being blocked, and even the school board apparently was unreceptive, somebody finally went to the FBI, is that right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and I know that the FBI is bound by law when they receive a complaint of wrongdoing or corruption, they have to investigate it, although it took them a couple of years right? To,
Yes, yes.
to conduct their investigation and create their case. But, and in the meantime, you had to make some decisions and so forth. And so what would you say to people who are caught in your situation, whether it's a small kind of unethical thing going on or a bigger issue like what you're talking about? What advice would you give people?
Well, in the realm of education, I just read a very good article this morning before I came here, and several principals from across the country were saying the exact same thing. When it comes to making decisions, you can go home at night feeling very comfortable if every decision you make is for the good of the kid. So people in education, if you're supposed to be focused on kids, then that's exactly what you need to do. You need to be focused on children.
And not lose sight of that.
And not lose sight of that.
Yeah.
You need to find ways. I found ways. The other principals that retired also found ways to continue supporting their children while giving lip service to what we knew was absolutely incorrect.
Right. And what has the Lord taught you through this experience? John, are you bitter?
No, absolutely not. I'm not bitter. Would I have liked to seen more people get justice? Yes, I certainly would have. But I understand. I was interviewed just like so many others were interviewed by the FBI, and of course they can only tell you so much. But no, I am absolutely not bitter. What I am is very, very thankful that all of this has come to light. And I want to see this district and districts across the nation that are in these situations with the testing and everything else. I want to see these people step up and remember what we're here for. It's for the kids. Not bitter at all. God doesn't want you to be bitter. He wants you to help things get better.
Yeah, right. And so when you have strong faith like you do, even though the situation was bad for a while, God still had his hand on you, still protected you, still provided you with a wonderful career opportunity. You're now consulting with other districts, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
More doors opened for me to actually go and help support other struggling schools across the state of Texas, and I love what I'm doing now.
Yeah, right. John, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a wonderful, insightful time, and I appreciate your willingness to speak out.
Holly, thanks very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Good. What do you think should be done about the corruption at the highest levels of EPISD? We're still in the middle of it. Will you pray that God will use this tragedy to positively transform our schools? Thank you so much for watching.